from the All Indiana Podcast Network.
It's time for real conversation about the real issues that affect our communities.
Poverty, education, equality, and more.
This is Real Talk.
Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Welcome to Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network. I'm Reverend Charles Harrison, and on this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about, does the Indianapolis 10-Point Coalition model to help to curb and end the cycle of violence, particularly among young black males between the ages of 12 years old and 24 years old, does it really work? Let's talk about that today on Real Talk. Welcome to Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And today, I want to talk a little bit about, some of the work that I have been doing, in Indianapolis now for 23 years, and answer this question that has, I would say, since 2009 has become somewhat controversial. When we talk about the work that the Indy 10-Point Coalition does, or the Indianapolis 10-Point Coalition, which is made up of a group of black churches in Indianapolis, primarily on the west side, but we have several churches on the east side, formed a group to help deal with curbing the pattern of urban violence as it impacts young men of color between the ages of 12 and 24 years old. This group was formed in 1999 under Mayor Stephen Goldsmith through the Front Porch Alliance, and that's how the group came to be formed. And we've been on the ground ever since then, helping to curb the pattern of urban violence in this city. There have been times when we primarily focus mainly on the 46208 zip code, which comprised of Unwa at the time, which included more neighborhoods, Crown Hill, Highland Vicinity, and the Butler-Tarkington neighborhoods. We also, back in 1999, focused on the Mapleton Fall Creek neighborhood. So we spent a lot of time in Mapleton Fall Creek, which happens to be the neighborhood that I live in. So certainly that was going to be one of the neighborhoods that we focused on because during that time, that neighborhood was also one of the hotspot areas in the city. That is no longer the case anymore. And then around 22nd, 23rd, 16th and College, in that area, which was known as Dodge City back then. Those were primarily the areas back in 1999 that the 10-Point Coalition worked in partnership with neighborhood groups, particularly neighborhood associations, and law enforcement groups. And back in those days, it was IPD before it became INPD, the Sheriff's Department, and our federal partners. So it was a combination of a lot of different groups. My guest today to talk with me about this conversation, does the Indianapolis 10-Point Coalition model really work? The faith-based model is John Hall, who back in 1999 was the deputy mayor of neighborhoods under Mayor Stephen Goldsmith. So certainly he is familiar with the 10-Point model and the work that we have been doing since 1999, 23 years ago. It's hard to believe that it's been 23 years. It is amazing. Well, John, hello, how you doing?
Doing fine, and appreciate the opportunity to join you.
Well, let's talk a little bit about it, and I kind of want to go through the numbers. I think 10-Point really under Mayor Goldsmith and Mayor Peterson basically used the model that we had learned back in, really it started in 1998. We kicked off in 1999 which was more of a model that focused primarily on clergy and some lay people going out in the streets in hotspot areas at nighttime. And back in 1999, we tended to be out on the streets on the weekends from about 10 p.m. to 12 a.m., 1 a.m. in the morning. So we focused on that time. That was tougher on Saturday nights because many of us had to get up and do an 8 o'clock service along with our second service. So, but we were much younger then, so we could do it back then. And then and we had a lot of success. I think the first year that we kicked off 10 Point, working in partnership with the city and with law enforcement, we saw a 40% reduction in violent crimes in our targeted areas. So that kind of catapulted 10 Point into the limelight, and we ended up being in a, I think it was a U.S. News magazine article about the whole Boston, Reverend Rivers, and back then, Indianapolis 10 Point was probably considered the second best model in the country, only behind the Boston 10 Point Coalition model based on our numbers. In 2016, let us go back. Under Mayor Ballard in 2009, we kind of relaunched the model again, and kind of extended it beyond the 46208 zip code, to try to help lower and bring the numbers down. And the focus back then was on 6 hotspot areas in the city. 10th and Tibbs, a 1 mile radius, 29th and MLK, 1 mile radius, 34th and Illinois, a 1 mile radius, 38th and Sherman, a 1 mile radius, 10th and Rural, 1 mile radius, and then the 42nd and Post Road area, a 1 mile radius around that. We work very closely with IMPD, the city, and other community groups to try to tackle the issue. And back then, John, the focus was on how do we reduce the level of shootings and criminal homicides. That was the focus. And the goal was, could we get it under 100? That was the goal. And we ended that year at 99 criminal homicides. I think another one got added sometime in January, February, but we ended that year with 99. And we saw 4 consecutive years of the city being under 100 murders, 2009, 2010, 2011, and 2012. There was 4 years that we were under 100 murders. And I thought, John, that the key to that was the city partnering with grassroots organizations, anti-violence groups, neighborhood associations, and allowing us to play a major role in driving the strategy for our particular area of the city. And I think the strategy differed from one part of the city to the other part of the city, but yet, I think the people on the ground played a key role in working with law enforcement and the mayor's office in driving that violence down. And we tried to implement what we felt like had been successful in past years in driving the violence down. Because really under Goldsmith and Peterson, I think the average number of murders a year was around 96. The city was doing pretty good. Yeah. But it was in 2009 that I think the controversy around 10 Point really began to emerge. And, I think it had a lot to do with 10 Point's close relationship with Republican administrations. and what seemed to be us helping them to drive down violence and protecting them and helping Republican officials to get elected. I think those were the things I was hearing. I don't know what you was hearing, but let's kind of talk a little bit about that, and then I'm going to get into what some of the numbers are since 2016 when we went to a new strategy. But prior to 2009, there was not much pushback about 10 Point in the Black community. Early on, when we had hired Isaac Randolph as the first executive director, there was some concern by some Black elected officials about him, but I thought we handled that well and made sure Isaac focused on the mission of 10 Point and not politics. So we didn't hear much more about that, though I know there was some in the Democratic Party that was concerned that we had hired him in the first place.
That's an interesting piece. Steve Goldsmith, one of his major focuses when he took office was to empower neighborhoods. We got about $5 million from the Lilly Endowment to work on getting neighbors in neighborhoods to use and utilize the power that they have to address city government and complain. If your trash isn't getting picked up,
right?
If the roads got holes in them, if there's crime, he wanted the action to be from the bottom up. He felt if he could train neighborhoods, show them the levers that can move city government, that would be a huge benefit and a plus to the city of Indianapolis. I think in '98, we had 143 homicides. You can check those numbers for me.
I think it was murders.
Murders. It was the highest.
Yeah.
It was highest in the city of Indianapolis.
Right.
Steve Goldsmith reached out to Boston and the River Organization to see if that faith-based model could work, because it fit right in with his empowering neighborhoods. And the blessing I think that happened was that you and some other ministers felt like we could adopt this model and make it work for the city of Indianapolis. And if I'm not mistaken, when you all hit the ground in '99, numbers went down.
They did.
And that, in my opinion, was a huge plus, because I think the model works.
Yeah, it went from 143 to 114 in a year. Yes.
It works. And I think the two critical factors that I saw was that there were boots on the ground, that presence, which can give neighbors a feeling that I'm not alone in this war. Somebody else knows about the battle I'm having with crime and trying to keep my neighborhood safe. Me trying to get to the grocery store, me trying to get to a doctor or a school. I think that was a critical fact. The other one is the culture in our Black community is that we won't tell. We won't snitch.
Right.
But if there are 15 or 20 people that are on the ground 4, 5, 6 days a week, I might be able to parlay some information without identifying myself,
Right.
which can address the concerns that I have. I believe those are the two critical factors that allow 10 Point to make impact on neighborhoods.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison, and my special guest is John Hall, who happened to be at that time in 1999 when 10 Point got started, was the deputy mayor of neighborhoods. And we're talking today on this episode, does the 10 Point model worked. And I think what most people don't understand about the model is that we are not just walking around the neighborhood, but it's very targeted in its approach in trying to interact and engage the most at-risk youth and young adults in the neighborhood who many times were connected to drug trafficking. They were part of the neighborhood gang or gangs. And today, we probably refer to most of them as more so neighborhood cliques. So we were trying to engage that target audience and trying to, one, redirect their lives and put them on a pathway of success. For those who were out of school but still school age, could we get them back in school or some kind of GED program at the time to prepare them for trade school or whatever they wanted to do with their life? And the second thing that we really focused on was how could we keep little Charles alive? You know, that was the focus. How could we keep him alive and get him to not settle his conflicts with violence? And if someone was beefing with him, how could we engage that individual or groups in a way that they could settle this squabble or conflict without it leading to someone being shot or injured or shot or killed? And that was really our focus on the ground, being able to identify where these individuals hung out at, who were the movers and shakers in the neighborhood. And I think we ascertained that. And I think we were in a very unique position as pastors because a lot of times those individuals who were the threat to the peace of the neighborhood had family members or relatives belonging to our churches. So that was an end that we had that prior to 10 Point, we really never realized that we had that. And I think that was our focus. And I think we did a successful job in not stopping it, but I do think we significantly reduced the level of shootings and murders. And I think that was our goal. Could we slow down the violence in the neighborhood and stop the bleeding so that the neighborhood would not bleed to death?
Yeah, that was an excellent point. And I think the fact that engagement, those attempt to engage young people who only feel they have that one choice,
right,
in order to make a good living. And I think your client, your staffing, you had experienced OGs who had lived in this neighborhood or were familiar with the neighborhood nuances, who could address these young people one-on-one.
Well, and we really expanded that by 2016. I think you're right, John. That became even a greater focus in 2016 as the clergy piece began to diminish and we began to elevate even more the OG piece. And for those who are wondering what we're talking about, it is a term that is used on the street for those who were a part of the formation of gangs in America, and by the time they got in their 20s, late 20s, early 30s, they were referred to as OGs, which means the original gangsters. So that's what that term means. It's a term of endearment, a term of respect now on the street if you call it OG. So many of the cities that were using the 10-point models would use the term violence interrupters, which really started in Chicago as Chicago adopted the Boston model. They use that term as violence interrupters. We felt like that the OG was a better term for us in Indianapolis because it was a non-threatening, title that we were giving the OGs, that people were already familiar with them. So we didn't change who they were, and we just kept that OG title under the umbrella of Indy 10 Point.
Fantastic. What I believe is that as long as there's presence and there's engagement, the city of Indianapolis stands a good chance of seeing this reduction.
Oh, I agree with that. And I kind of want to talk about, and then we kind of get into the other stuff, the hot stuff about the organization itself and what led so much to the controversy about 10 Point. In 2016, a year after the city had broken another homicide record, and I would say 10 Point was not surprised that it was going to happen. We felt like that the city had made a tactical mistake in moving the crime prevention dollars that were supporting the work of faith-based groups and anti-violence groups and community centers and some other community stakeholder groups in helping to curb the violence that we were seeing, particularly in the urban core. And that was really our focus, in the urban core, in those areas that, you can probably go back 30, 40 years where we've been having problems, right? Once that money was moved, and many of those frontline organizations that are in these hotspot areas no longer got the funding and the resources, we started to see an uptick in shootings, stabbings, and criminal homicides, and it just continued. What 10 Point tried to do in 2016 was to adjust to having less funding, but still trying to have an impact on the ground. So we went from full-time people to paying stipends for OGs on the ground in these hotspot areas, which meant, John, that we could deploy more people with less money.
Okay.
And we established, 4 areas of the city: Butler, Tarkington, Crown Hill, Highland Vicinity, and Unwah. At the time, were going to be our target areas. So we would take, put a team in each area, hotspot area. We would have 3 to 7 people on a team, and each team would put in about 10 hours a week on the ground. So that would be 4 or 5 days, because normally on the weekend they stayed out a little longer. Most nights they were out 2 hours a night. Very targeted, focus on where the police were having the most runs, what was happening in the neighborhood, trying to react to real-time data, and identifying who were the hot people, who were the hot groups, and that was our focus. Okay. And we saw an immediate impact in Butler, Tarkington, from 2015, where they had 4 or 5 homicides. It went from 4 or 5 homicides to 0. We also saw the same thing in Crown Hill, which was a more dramatic decline. They had 9 homicides in 2015. They went from 9 to 0. Okay. Unwah, which normally had about 10 homicides, went from 10 to 3, and then Highland Vicinity ended up with 2 homicides. So we started focusing on that, and since then, that was our focus area. The Highland Vicinity neighborhood has now gone 6 consecutive years without a homicide. Just remarkable. Butler Tarkington has gone 4 times in almost 7 years. Crown Hill has gone 2 times in almost 7 years. 3 times, which is our target group, young men of color between the ages of 12 and 24. Unwah has not gone any year yet without any homicide, but they've gone 1 year without a black male, 12 to 24, being killed. And then several years ago, we went out to 42nd and Post Road. We were out there for a year and a half. One of the hottest areas in the city. We patrolled from 38th to 42nd Street, Post Road, over to 42nd and Minhoffer to 38th and Minhoffer. This is from June of, 2018 to June of 2019, there were 0 homicides. I don't know if that has happened. It has not happened in my 30 years of being here. 0 homicides. Then we moved from that area to 42nd and Minhoffer to 42nd, to 38th and Minhoffer, over to 42nd and German Church, to 38th and German Church, and the focus was on the Carriage House East Apartments, the filling station down at 38th and Minhoffer, where they have a lot of problems down there, have had a lot of shooting. That area now in 2.5 years have gone 2 times, 365 days without a homicide. So the work of 10 Point in the midst, John, of the city since 2015, we have seen the highest level of shootings, stabbings, and homicides in the history of Indianapolis.
Yes.
You know, record-breaking years. As we were seeing record-breaking years across the city, in the 10 Point areas, 15 times since 2016, our areas have gone a year without anybody being killed, and 16 times without any black male between the ages of 14 and 24 being killed. We have a few more weeks left, and that number is going to go up significantly of areas that have gone a year without a homicide. This year, we have had 0 youth homicides in the Highland vicinity, 0 adult homicides. In Butler Tarkington, 1 adult homicide, 0 youth. In Crown Hill, 0 adult, 1 youth. In the 29th and MLK area, in a 2-block radius around one of the 3 hottest spots in the city, we've had 0 adults, 0 youth. 42nd and Minhoffer area, 0 adults, 0 youth. And in the Lake Castleton apartments at 75th and Shadeland, 0 adults and 0 youth homicides.
That is great.
Yeah.
That is great numbers. Can you, how easy is it to sustain this effort?
I think it's difficult. I think it's difficult. The problem becomes, John, once you hit 0, there's no place to go but up. So what you have to lower the expectations a little bit and talk about impact. And I think we try to focus on what has been the impact of this collaborative partnership with IMPD. And it's not just the work of 10 Point, but it's our close partnership with IMPD that I think, and other community groups, as we coordinate our efforts in trying to address the issue of violence. But the question becomes, and here's where the bulk of our conversation, why has 10 Point with these numbers become so controversial? And the numbers are questioned. What's behind that, and what's going on that 10 Point has become so controversial in Indianapolis?
Well, I think, politics is always in the game. It's always going to be in the game. So the fact that Steve Goldsmith started or invited the Boston model in and wanted to see if there was any faith-based groups here who wanted to adopt that, I think that starts it off. That starts it off. Under his administration, 10 Point was the focus. Well, under a new administration, then it becomes, you gain people that like you, and you gain people that don't like maybe not necessarily the effort or the initiative, but, there's jealousy, there's envy, there's all those things. But the political factor, I think, is there. So it started under a Republican administration. Others are going to come up with their own plan in order to demonstrate the effectiveness. But most of the models, most of the initiatives that are out there are roughly based on a 10-point model.
Well, they are, and I think probably my assessment of it, John, is that it became personality driven. That Reverend Harrison became the focal point of the attacks, and for several reasons. Certainly, I would say because I'm outspoken. My appearance on TV and media, I think, created some issues with other black leaders in the city. The perception was that I was being hailed as the Moses in the community, the spokesman for the black community.
Right.
And I think I was willing to speak the truth based on my understanding of what was going on, that sometimes would be critical of Democrats, so the criticism wasn't just toward Republicans, but sometimes Democrats, and I think all of those factors, led to, this attack about 10 point. Well, we're fudging the numbers, we're not that effective, and you was hearing all of those things, but the real reality on the ground was that was really not true.
Well, I think that an organization like 10 Point, a leader like you in our community, you're going to attract distractors. I mean, that's just part of
Yes.
the nature of the game. And, but it's the politics of the piece that's out there.
Right.
Yeah. And that's what I think, you ran into. I can remember one time you were interested or thinking about running for mayor.
Right.
Well, that will fire up the enemy.
Yeah.
They will let you know. So, but I think what people have to learn about you, Pastor, is that your desire to lower violence, to get youth on the right track, is genuine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a mission. It's a ministry piece.
Right.
And I think a lot of people may not understand that clear enough.
Right.
And you are willing to throw down.
Yes.
In order to reduce violence and to get young people of color, and matter of fact, anyone, on the right track
Yes.
for a more quality life. And that's difficult today.
Well, it is. I guess I never thought that lowering violence or attempting to lower violence could be controversial, particularly when, Indianapolis is like a lot of, urban cities across the country, where we are experiencing extreme, amounts of violence that is impacting, the black community in a disproportionate way, which also increases the number of young black males, in particularly, that end up in the system.
Correct.
So we see that, and then it also increases the number of children without fathers, those who have been killed by this violence. So we see the impact of the violence.
Devastating.
And I think at first, John, I think it caught me off guard at first. It caught me off guard when the pushback first started.
Because you believe everybody should be concerned about those numbers.
Yes.
And to be honest, if you direct those questions in that fashion, in other words, if you say to our neighborhoods, our families are going to be broken up by this violence, our young kids will not get a good start in life because of this violence. If neighborhoods understand the devastation that takes place with young kids not being skillful or equipped enough to make a living in this new technology, this informational society, and they're choosing violent means, then what does that say 30, 40 years from now as we look back on our neighborhoods, our children, our families, our institutions, how strong can we be? That's where I think people would listen maybe a little more clearly.
Yeah, because my concern is that I don't see it getting better. I have lived through it almost the entire 62 years. 60. I think we've had a urban violence problem in America for about 60 years, in my opinion. Going all the way back to the 70s.
Yeah.
In major cities. So, I see it getting worse. Yesterday, I was driving down 38th Street, and I was turning at 38th and College, heading north. And I happened to see a young man whose, pants were sagging, but I noticed something on the side. And, as I looked, John, I could see a gun with an extended magazine. And as I do this work now on 10 Point, I'm seeing more and more of that from younger and younger African-American males, which really concerns me as, and they tend to be involved in more and more violent acts and criminal activity.
You did not feel he was going to have a good day?
No. Or is there a sense out there now from these young people, and we hear this too, that I gotta have it in order to protect myself because of my fear of others out there who may try to do something to me.
And that's, unfortunately, in 2022, that's a valid point.
It is. So for me, I guess my concern, and this is the way I look at it, everybody who's out here trying to do something about this epidemic, for me, I applaud them.
Yeah,
I don't think, when I talk about the work of 10 Point, I do not believe that 10 Point is the silver bullet. I believe that we're one piece of a larger strategy that can help lower the level of crime and violence in the neighborhood. I believe that. And I think we add a piece to it, but we're not the only piece to it. But we do play a significant role along with other groups. But the boots on the ground approach in dealing directly with those who are on the street, the power of presence does play a role. It does play a role, and it tends to keep individuals while we're out there from acting out.
I believe that. A factor that I heard earlier this year, that 90% of African American students in Indiana did not pass the I-Learn examination. What's that, third grade, fifth grade?
Right.
Like that. How then will those young people, without some intervention, without some tutoring, how will they make it through their senior year feeling they've got a future?
That's true.
Unless there's intervention from the schools, from parents, mainly parents.
Right.
Parents and then schools and the community.
Well, and that's why I think it has to be more of a holistic approach, because we have to understand what are the factors that are driving young men and today young women down this path of crime and violence. What's creating the hopelessness, where I don't see a future for myself, so I'm willing to do whatever it takes to survive.
And, I suppose as you and 10 Point are in the streets, you see possibly what young people see. In other words, there may be other young people successful. Are they successful in this underground economy?
They are. That's what the attraction is. So if you see someone successful who's low expectations, driving a nice car, may have a lot of women and all of that, then that becomes the measuring tool for which others want to strive to. But it's nothing compared to what other blacks are doing, in making themselves successful in the larger community. But many of them don't see that. They don't see other possibilities based on the skill set that they have, that they can dream to be almost anything they want to be and have that potential inside of them. Most of them don't see that world.
And that's where I think 10 Point has a major role. If the engagement can expose them to other options,
yes,
that is a big event.
Yeah, and I think, you have to create some hope in the midst of all of this hopelessness, so that you don't feel like that your only option is to carry that gun, to rob someone, or to sell drugs. That's your only option in life. And I think that's what we have to overcome. And I think that's going to take a community effort. And certainly what 10 Point does on the ground is an important piece in turning this around.
I believe that.
Well, John, thank you so much for joining me today on this important conversation. I'm hoping that in about 14 or 15 more days, we're going to have some more good news.
Amen.
And we're, 10 Point, we're about 14 or 15 days away from having the best year ever in the 30 years of our work on the ground. We could possibly end the year with 4 out of our 7 areas without a homicide.
That is amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing. Yeah, we have never done that, but we are that close to doing that. And I just want to thank all of the partners, IMPD. They are just great, in the work that they do, and we certainly, and all the other community groups, in these neighborhoods that are doing outstanding work, and together we make a good team. This has been Reverend Harrison, and I want to thank you so much for joining me today as I bring more real talk about real issues that affect our communities here in Indianapolis and across the country. Be sure to subscribe and follow me on this podcast and share it on Facebook and Twitter. And if I don't get a chance to talk to you anymore before Christmas, I want to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas. Look forward to talking with you again after Christmas, just before the new year on Real Talk. I pray that you have a blessed and you have an awesome day.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast.
And be sure to check out other great podcasts on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Online now at allindianapodcast.com.